Ready? We're supposed to get started.
We've started.
Is it started the handheld thing?
Yes.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm going to call this October 6th meeting of the Legislation Committee of the New Haven Board of Alders to order, and I will read the notice. The Legislation Committee of the Board of Alders will meet in person on Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the Board of Alders chamber located at 165 Church Street, second floor, New Haven, Connecticut, to hear and act on the following items. 1. OR-2021-0032, ordinance amendment to the section 12.5, 43.2, subsection C4 of the New Haven Code of Ordinances, adding a section 4, specifying that the building official is responsible for enforcing section 12.5, 43.2, subsection C, number 4 of the ordinance and ensuring the compliance with the same. 2, OR-2023-0031, ordinance amendment approving the amendment to Title 5, Housing Code, Part 102, penalties of the City of New Haven Code of Ordinances. And 3, OR-2023-0001, ordinance amending the New Haven Code of Ordinances to license and inspect salons within the City of New Haven in accordance with Connecticut State Statutes 20-2344 and 20-250, 19A-231, and Chapter 384A for the purposes of setting standards for operation and maintenance of barbershops, body piercing shops, hair salons, massage parlors, nail salons, and tattoo shops to minimize health hazards in accordance with Section 16 of the Code of General Ordinances. For order, Honorable Ellen Cupo, Chair, attest Honorable Michael Smart, City Town Clerk. These items are on file and available in the Office of the City Clerk, room 202 at 200 Orange Street, New Haven, Connecticut, 03510. For accessibility related accommodations, please call 203-946-7651 or 203-946-8582. Public comment testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavenct.gov before 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting. This meeting may be viewed on the New Haven Board of Alders YouTube page. And so we have 3 items before us. Before we dive into our items, I just wanted to have a moment for the committee to introduce themselves. I'm Ellen Cupo. I'm Chair of Legislation. I'm also the Alder of Ward 8. And I'll be with it. So my next chair.
Richard Furlow, Ward 27. Eli Saban, Ward 7.
Adam Marchand, Alder of Ward 25.
Evelyn Rodriguez, Ward 4.
Excellent. So I think at this time, we're going to make the first item, OR-2021-0032, to please come up to the table to begin your presentation. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Sally Esposito, and I live at 50 Downing Street in Fairhaven. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight about this issue, which has been something the Commission on Disabilities has been talking about and looking at for many, many years. I've been a member of the Commission since 2015, and the issue of out-of-service elevators in residential buildings and its impact on individuals with disabilities preceded my joining the Commission. In fact, when I served in the position as director of the department back in '87 through '97, it still was an issue at that point. And we had people who were really desperate to try to maintain their daily lives and often couldn't either get out of their apartments to get to medical appointments or work or get back in if the elevators went out during the time that they were away from their units. The commission's been working on an ordinance amendment for many, many years, which you probably know some of the legislative history. An earlier amendment, I think, placed the enforcement responsibility in CEO. I'm not sure, well, I think really what we were thinking is that it really didn't provide the right kind of enforcement mechanism. There wasn't really sort of the sort of announcements about it and that kind of thing. And we really felt like we needed to do something more. And that's what led us to this opportunity now. And I have to say over the last year or so, I haven't personally been involved in the redrafting, but there have been a number of city departments, personnel, our director, Gretchen Knopf, and many others have been working on this for a really long time. So I think the product is really a good one, and that it's something that I think can do the things that we've been trying to do for decades at this point, and that I hope that you will see your way to endorse it and support it as you go forward. So I want to thank you for this opportunity. We also have, you can probably see a number of the members of the commission sitting back there. Some will be testifying, some won't, but we really appreciate your efforts to make this, to help us to go forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for being here. Are there any questions from committee to start? Marchand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the follow-up work on this. I remember when this item first came before this committee some years ago. I'm a little bit, I'm kind of wondering why we don't have a representative from the building department here. Since they're actually taking responsibility for enforcement, it would give me reassurance if they were here saying, yes, we're eager to do that work. So to what extent can you tell us about the conversations that were had with that department, which will actually be charged with enforcing the ordinance?
So I actually will defer to Gretchen Knopf and to, I believe, Corporation Counsel is here as well. So, and they have been more involved in the most recent conversations and the product that you see before you now. I was giving you a little history of, where we were before this most recent draft. So I think, I'm sorry, they could probably answer your question better than I can, because I can't really answer it.
Great, okay. I look forward to their responding to that.
If Gretchen and if Corp Counsel want to approach and join Sally. Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Gretchen Knopf. I'm the Director of the Department of Services for Persons with Disabilities. I live at 228 Mile Creek Road in Old Lyme, Connecticut.
I'm Pat King, Corporation Counsel, 32 Vista Terrace in New Haven.
So maybe we can clarify a little bit
Yeah.
building code, the building inspector question. So originally, probably about a year and a half ago, the commission decided that there needed to be an update because of the reports that we had seen about different people getting stuck because the elevators weren't working. And Alder DeCola came to the commission meeting. He set up a meeting with Alder Furlow, thank you very much. And we met with city departments, with the building inspector, the fire department, LCI, PSAP, the chief administrative office, and Corp Counsel. And so in that meeting, we started talking about this, and it went from the thing that it is now to the building inspector to actually now the amendment talks about enforcement with LCI. And if you look at what we started with and where we ended, it's the same, but it's very different in some ways. So I thought maybe since Sally and Billy were here from the commission to talk a little bit more about history and why it's important, that I would just talk about what the changes are.
That would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this work group, this larger group met a couple of times, and then Pat and Misty, Maza, and I made a small work group, and we worked on changes, and then met with the larger group again, and then went back and made changes and came up with this. So at this point, it deletes section 4 and 12.5.43.2 and incorporates it into a new section 9-52. And 9-52 would move enforcement from CEO, and they're fine with that, to LCI. And LCI has been part of the conversation all the way to the end. So they are okay with this and have commented on it, talked about the enforcement of it, so they know exactly what's coming to you. It adds a definition section, which we didn't have. And the violation section, which is basically that section 4 that got moved. One violation is failing to provide 24-hour written notice of scheduled maintenance. That's the same. Failure to conduct scheduled maintenance in accordance with industry standards. That's the same. Improper and inadequate maintenance that results in inoperable elevators is the same. What changed is it's a violation if an elevator is broken for more than 48 hours or 2 times in the past 30-day period. Unless there are 2 things. The repair delay is due to circumstances beyond the owner's control, and they do have a service contract. So it's a way to sort of incentivize having service contracts. And then also that the owner offers to pay for lost income, equivalent alternative housing and moving costs. So it goes back to changing it from 72 hours to 48. And then one of the things that took us a little bit is that we got a couple of reports about the elevator would break and they would fix it. And then 3 days later it would break again. And then a few days later it would break again. And there are people with disabilities, who have mobility disabilities, who work, and this jeopardizes their work status. And there are people who need to get out to appointments, and if you cancel too many appointments, the doctors are going to say, well, we don't want you as a patient anymore. Sometimes it's very difficult to find a new doctor, especially these days. So those are the couple of things. That also, the fire department requested that a Knox box be installed at every building where there's an elevator, so that they will have a key at their ready. And then another big item is that signage has to be provided that says what to do if the elevator is broken. So the signage would be on every floor. It would be outside and inside the elevator. And if hopefully this will pass through you and go to the alders, the landlord or owner has to provide notification that this exists to all of the tenants who are in the building. The remaining language, the penalty for this is $250 a day. That would be part of the enforcement for LCI. And the remaining language, most of it is the enforcement process, the appeal, hearing, how that goes through, and that follows other LCI enforcement process in the other ordinances. And that's why it doesn't say building inspector anymore. We read this and went, is this the right one?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that synopsis of the changes. It's very helpful. So in the discussions with LCI,
Yes.
well, let me take a step back. So when a new project is being built, there are building codes that determine specifications for elevators, and the building department is obviously involved then in certifying that the building code has been met for new construction, including an elevator, right? So now we're talking about buildings that are already existing where the elevators are in operation. What happens if they break, right? And what are the requirements on landlords? Who enforces those requirements? And that's LCI. So that's LCI in a responsive mode when they are hearing from some tenant or some resident that there's a broken elevator. It's not like there's little wireless monitors in every elevator that go off when they go inoperative. Like there's no way of knowing that an elevator is not working unless someone reports it. But in the discussions with LCI, is it already the case that LCI inspects elevators when they do the inspection of existing residential structures? Or would it be added to the list of things that they're looking at buildings when they're doing, for example, residential inspections as part of the residential licensing program?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that elevator inspection is done by the state. And when we had those discussions, I actually went to the state to get a list of the different places in the city that have elevators, and they do the inspection. They sign that card that's inside the elevator. So they're the ones who are responsible.
So they do the regular checks of the elevator. So LCI is being asked just to be the responding agency when there's a report of a malfunctioning elevator.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, just as a comment, LCI is not authorized to determine whether an elevator is operational. So that goes to the fire marshal and to the inspector. They're just a call-in number because LCI is open 24 hours. It seems to be more reasonable for it to go through LCI, as we've discussed, rather than going through a 911 call, because that case, it just burdens that center down for an elevator that's not in use. What LCI will do is they may go and press the button and see that there's no response. And then upon doing that, then they will call the fire marshal for an inspection to say that the elevator is not in service. So I think that's a very important note, that they're just manning the calls, but they have nothing to do with the actual inspection of elevators. Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, I should also mention the reason why I'm adding that in is because I was part of the group, and Alderman Cole is not able to be here this evening. And so he will be sitting there. And so I'm kind of filling in the blanks for him. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Rodriguez.
Thank you. It looks like a lot of work has gone into this process and these concerns that you have. In terms of the tenant and landlord leases, have you looked into that and seen if there's anything regarding elevators and repairs, and if they're not working in those leases, and regarding the disabled?
No. We didn't take a look at that at all.
No, I think to respond to your question, there are so many different landlords with elevators in different buildings, and I don't know that we could require them all to have a standardized lease, so to speak, or lease agreement, but they all have to abide by the city ordinances. So we really didn't consider trying to impose requirements on lease agreements for all the different landlords who could be involved in this.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Fred.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I probably should sit there.
Come on over.
And pretend I'm Alder Cola for a moment. Would you speak, I think it's good for the committee to hear the federal laws as it pertains to elevators not being in service, and how we really have an obligation to make sure that this population of people are serviced.
Okay, so the Federal Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, and also there's a corresponding state statute require that individuals with disabilities receive reasonable accommodation in their residential units, that there's a prohibition against discrimination, and that that every person with a disability is entitled to equal use and enjoyment, and those are terms in those statutes. And what they found is if an elevator is broken, there is an obligation to provide an accommodation to an individual to be in alternative housing. And it can't just be, you may have somebody who has a mobility issue where they need to have an elevator, but they also may be diabetic. And so when we talked about and added that equivalent alternative housing, because it may need to be a place with a refrigerator. And also a lot of individuals, can't afford to have moving costs or be out of the monies from their positions. So you would find that if there was a settlement under fair housing, that all of those things would be important and that they would be required. I know we talked a lot in our meetings about only going up to the 4th floor, and this obligation is anything above or below ground level under the state and federal law. So it's not just looking at it as a fire code, it's looking at it as a habitation kind of requirements of civil right.
Thank you. I think that's a very important piece to add. And also just one other question. I don't know if we have the numbers. I don't see anyone here from the fire department, but the cost that is involved from the fire department when the fire department has to go in and help someone down the stairs because the elevators have been broken for so long. And we don't have those numbers, so it is kind of a question. I'm not going to ask for it through you, but I think that's just something that is part of the conversation also, that this will also help defray possibly that cost of whatever that may be. So my question answered. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for giving me the latitude
Yes,
to
of course.
kind of double up here.
Thank you for your expertise on this. Appreciate it. Any further questions from committee on this item?
Thank you.
Alderman Sean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm thinking about the fines, and you addressed that. The way that LCI works now for anti-blight violations, for example, is that those are attached as liens on the property. So if LCI is mowing someone's yard every week because the property management company is not doing that, there's a cost that the city incurs for doing that. And that cost is, it's a lien that's placed on the property. I'm wondering what the mechanism for collecting the fines in this instance is. If it's similarly a lien placed on the property, I suspect not. It's an actual fine that you have to go to court to enforce. What is the mechanism for collecting the fine? I know there's an appeal process, but I don't think it would be a lien on the property, as is the case with an anti-blight enforcement measure.
I'm not sure, because LCI worked with Misty, and basically when we talked about it and went through the whole thing, it was using whatever their regular process is and to enforce whatever the issue is that's come up to them. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how they're going to collect that.
Well, I think it would be similar to the anti-blight procedures, because as I'm reading this, again, it appears to be that same process. So I would think it would have to be through that same process. And then we have to go through the hearing officer procedure to perfect a lien, if that's the way.
And that isn't.
I've just gotten mixed feedback over the years about the effectiveness of that lien process in terms of short-term changes in behavior. Like the behavioral economics of a lien that you're not going to worry about until you sell the property is different than a fine that you have to pay now. And so I'm just, you want the fine to have a stinging effect that would change behavior. And would it have that effect if the impact is years down the road?
Yeah, exactly.
That's my concern.
The lien sits on the property until somebody decides to sell it, and then,
Then they'll deal with the debt.
Yeah,
And
they
they'll
deal
ask for
with
more
it
money.
then. And then they contact LCI and try to get them to compromise the lien, I think.
Yeah.
It happens on occasion, not aware that they do it. But, you know, it's certainly, we're seeing a trend, as we'll see in the building code, amendment coming up to increasing the fines. And, you know, at some point enabling legislation possibly could be enacted to do the same thing for an ordinance like this.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I add something? Yeah, I think we did talk about the fact that $250 seemed to be a limitation and that it wasn't really an incentive. But requiring a landlord to move somebody to equivalent housing, to pay for the moving costs, to pay for salary, to pay for the expense of wherever they're moving, we thought might be somewhat of an incentive.
And also, if they don't pay, that becomes a lien on the property, and then you're back to that issue again.
This is the follow. So to your point, Attorney King, if the property owner fails to make good on those obligations to relocate someone and put them up in a hotel or something and pay for it, then the city steps in and does it and then attaches a lien to the property for the costs of that relocation and that rehousing. Right? I mean, can you go to court and get an emergency injunction to require the landlord to do that, or is the remedy the city does it and then bills them for it after that?
I think that's the remedy that's provided, as I recall, in the Uniform Relocation Act.
Okay.
But I don't know that anybody's ever, I don't know that situations ever occurred since I've been here, or that anybody's thought of it, but it's a good idea. And I think we'll keep it in mind if the situation comes up.
You know, these are just some practical questions that come to mind. You know, hopefully it doesn't happen very often. You don't need to hire a whole bunch of staff just to enforce this particular ordinance. But, you know, in an instance where a landlord is being unresponsive, the city just can't sit by and watch somebody not be able to get to work. Somebody has to act right away. And if there's a property owner who's not willing to do that because they're unresponsive for whatever reason, the city's got to do it. So the city has to have resources to be able to do that and bill them later. So it's just some of the limitations of the way the enforcement setup has been, way the enforcement has been set up for this agency. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in my seat over there role, just again. So the important part of this, the fines that come through, as we've discussed this, the fines that come through LCI, they're really supposed to be paid. When they're not paid, then they turn into a lien. The building department, in our discussion with them, decided that it wouldn't be a good idea because of how that's collected. So if the building official issues a citation, they have the option to close the building. It's not our intention for them to close the building, because the second option would be, or the second requirement is for them to move the person who needs the assistance into a place that will be more convenient for them until the elevator is repaired. So, so that's why we opted not to go with the building department, because of how they do their citations. That a fine would be incurred, which is payable. If they don't pay it, then it turns into a lien. But as it's already been explained, they're going to incur additional expense in having to provide housing for whoever is not able to use the elevator because of it being broken. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I just wanted to note for the record that our colleague from the board, 22 of them, were sent us from this. Any further questions?
I just have one more question. This is in reference to doing the enforcement, especially in a time when we have so many concerns regarding housing. And I would think that we would want to maintain a relationship between landlord and tenant, so that has there been any discussion in reference to maybe having the mediator of our fair rent department connected so as to imagine if this situation happened at, which one is the one that's in Foxen Boulevard? Bella Vista. Imagine how many people would we have to find a place for, so that it might be good to have, I don't know if you've thought about a relationship with inferior commission or departments that have to deal with that. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. We'll certainly give that some consideration. I'm not sure that's within the statutory authority of the Fair Rent Commission, but it's certainly something that's worth looking at. But I think you're right, with all of the focus now on housing.
Thank you.
I think we're going to see a lot of changes. They may be a little bit more piecemeal than what we might like, but I think that's something that maybe could be done, or maybe through the housing court even.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's good to note also that this ordinance addresses if there is no elevator on the floor. So if you have a place like Bella Vista that most likely has more than one elevator on the floor, one that is operable, then they wouldn't be fined, because you can get to another elevator on that same floor.
They're both working.
So this is addressing a place like Valley Street, Mountain Valley. There, that elevator was out recently because someone hit a car, or a car hit a pole. And so the power was out. So I got the fire marshal there to help people up and down the stairs, because they only have one elevator. So this is what that's addressing, when there's just one elevator per floor and that elevator is not working. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to ask questions more than once. I know I didn't think of all my questions all at the same time. They keep coming up piecemeal, and I appreciate your patience. And it may be that my colleague from the 27th Ward will be ready to answer it, which should be fine. Power outages. It's true, Bella Vista has multiple elevators, but when the power gets cut to a building, none of the elevators works. I know this because I've been there several times visiting with colleagues when the power went out. And so and in that case, the inoperability of the elevator is not because the property manager has been negligent in maintenance. It's because there's no power to the building, which may be, who knows why that is. It could be a storm, it could be a car plowing into a transformer, it could be some issue with the utility. So does this ordinance amendment contemplate that possibility? Would it not be applicable in that circumstance? What do you think this ordinance would say about a situation like that?
I would say that's a circumstance beyond their control. And I don't think it would apply.
And then I would thank you, Madam Chair, and I would add that it doesn't address short-term outages. So it would have to be out for 48 hours. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to open it up for public comment.
Thank you.
So on my list for the public hearing, I have
already have
Sally
two of us.
Gretchen. Yeah. So I think we'll move on to Billy Twang. Oh,
You want to say that, Ben?
Okay, well, thanks.
hello.
Good, how are you?
Thank you for being here. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
Sure. Billy Wong, 265 College Street. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think Gretchen, Sally, and the entire commission, many of our members are actually here. I am the chair of the New Haven Commission on Disability, so this is really great to, just have this item. It's been a long time coming. I prepped some testimony to really talk about it, but I think you guys have really just covered it at a pretty in-depth level. And so I'm going to just deviate off script for a little bit. But I think just to give a little more context into this entire process, a lot of your questions today really circled around this idea of, okay, if a situation happens, what is the practical process that you would go, to actually mediate, say, a broken elevator or whatnot? And those were the same challenges that, we discussed at length when we were considering this way back pre-COVID. The previous iteration of this legislation didn't really provide an enforcement agency that really had the scope of LCI. And so when we were going back and forth, we were really wondering whether or not this should be in the purview of the building department, whether or not this should be the fire marshal, whether or not this should be LCI. And so that was really the motivation behind the process that Gretchen has really painstakingly started to be able to convene these working groups to really hammer out the legislation and just understand what everyone's ability to address this would be. And I think we still have a lot of unanswered questions. I think the only way to really test this out is to test this out, right? You're not going to, see whether or not what the limitations are. Placing a lien, I mean, that's a very light fine. Honestly, for a person who's in crisis, that's not going to help them at all. So insofar as what's going to happen is, I think we should test out this process. There's going to be a subset of landlords, very large ones, who probably have processes in place, for such incidents. And I think that is something that folks are already working on. And then for smaller landlords, I think that is something that needs to be built out. Increasing this signage is actually really important, because what it does is that it creates an environment where everyone begins to participate in this process and everyone begins to understand the issue of broken elevators. So the response time decreases. And in terms of the processes themselves, they'll just probably have to be figured out as things go on. Thank you. I know I'm a little over time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions from the community? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony.
Yeah, for sure. Really like to just acknowledge, commission members, who are in the back, many of whom worked many hours with us to make this happen, and we hope that this will continue.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Is there anyone else present who wishes to testify on this item? I will ask a second time, is there anyone from the public wishing to testify on this item? And for a third and final time, is there anyone wishing to testify on this item? All right. With that, we will move on to our second item of the evening, which is OR-2023-003, the ordinance amendment approving the amendment to Title V, Housing Code 102, penalties of the City of New Haven code ordinances that the maker is approaching. Good evening.
I think this is me again.
Name and address for the record, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Pat King, Corporation Counsel, 32 Vista Terrace in New Haven.
Thank you so much. Please begin.
Yes, this is an amendment to our building code to increase fines that were authorized for building code violations pursuant to what I think of as Senate Bill 998. That authorizes the increased fines for building code violations on rental properties that are as described in the amendment. I would note that there's a penalty increase to $2,000 per violation, which is the significant type of increase I think that we are thinking about when we talk about the relatively modest penalties now. And I would note that in reviewing this and the enabling legislation briefly, our amendment requires or provides that each day the violation continues is a separate violation. And someone would be subject to a $2,000 fine. for every day. And I have to say that when I was reviewing the enabling legislation, it's silent on this. So I think that's an issue that we're gonna have to take back and review. Because it may be an artifact from our previous ordinance, which has generally considered these types of violations to be cumulative, if you will. So I think we have to take another look at that, and we'll be happy to send some communication to the committee. The committees will be happy to work with you before this goes to the floor, so that we can be consistent with the enabling legislation. Certainly a $2,000 fine per day might get people's attention, but on the other hand, we want to make sure we stay within the limits of what the enabling legislation allows. So we will take another look at that. And then the other aspect, which I thought was a little bit unusual in this enabling legislation, is that it allows the Board of Alders to be the adjudicator of an appeal if the landlord wants to claim that the blight violation is caused by the tenant. And it's so, I guess, from sort of a strict legal perspective, it's a little bit of a separation of powers issue, because you're the legislative branch and the judicial branch at the same time. And so the way that we worded the ordinance after a little discussion with leadership is that the board could designate a committee if there is a committee of the board, or a hearing officer if the board wanted to leave the task of adjudicating these appeals to a hearing officer. So, and we welcome input, obviously, from the committee if there's a preference or you'd like us to address this in a different way. But those seem to be the most feasible ways. I think if this had to go through a whole, the full process of the Board of Alders, you'd be a month or 2 months before you adjudicated one of these. And I don't know that procedurally you're set up to be to hold a trial, so to speak, or to have a hearing. So there may be preferences on that, and we're happy to work with you if you feel that the issue is adequately addressed in the draft that we have. And I would note there was an enabling legislation apparently signed by the governor that would also increase the anti-blight fines, so we're also working on that as well. But that's not before you tonight.
Thank you. Questions?
Alderman Sean's after that.
I've been thinking about this for a while because we heard about this at City Plan, give advice on it. And I found the adjudication issue curious. So I know you're not a member of the Connecticut General Assembly, but presumably someone from your office looked at the legislative record to see more about what the intent was from the General Assembly to set it up this way as opposed to some other way. Can you shed any light about what the discussion was that would cause the Assembly to say it should be the local legislative body?
I wish I could. We, worked with the enactment that was actually passed by the legislature. So I don't really know. As I say, I think it is curious.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt that giving the board the option to appoint a hearing officer might be one way for the board to discharge its duties under the statute, but not necessarily find itself in that way in the adjudicatory roles.
And you found that the language of the legislation gave that much scope, that it didn't prescribe what precise mechanism the local legislative body should use?
No, it did not.
Okay.
It did not. But we felt that it was certainly within the purview. It will be within the purview of the board to appoint a hearing officer to handle this rather than, as I say, have it go through the whole board process. I don't even know procedurally how that would work. So But any other suggestions would be happy to work on another
If-
an amendment or draft.
So did that law say that if the municipality wanted to increase the fines, this is this process they would need to set up? Or did the law say this is the new process regardless of whether or not the local municipality increased the amount of the fine?
As I recall, it wasn't tied to the increase in the
Okay.
fine.
It was just
And
the
it
new
was, and it
process.
was just on the issue of the tenant causing the,
Just on the issue of the tenants
yes,
and not the
not any
property
other,
owner or manager.
you know, right, not any other offense they might have.
And so the tenant could be responsible for a fine of up to $250 per violation.
I don't think we'd be fining the tenant. I didn't read the Senate bill to be fining the tenant for the violation. It was just a defense for the landlord, so the landlord wouldn't have.
Oh, okay. So if the landlord says, I'm not paying this because it was the fault of the tenant.
Yeah, that's it. It's
So
a,
there is a section that provides for potential fines for individual tenants. That's the $250, right?
yeah,
Okay. So it's $250 for tenants and it's $2,000 for property owners per violation. Am I getting that wrong? Okay, I'm getting that
yeah, I
wrong.
know, I have to look at
Somebody
that.
will explain it.
Well, if I
Thank you,
can
Madam Chair.
add, so we've got a wealth of knowledge at this table. Elder Sagan, did you want to weigh in?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. So for some context, in a different life, I work in a nonprofit called the Connected Voice for Children, and in that role, I proposed this change to the General Assembly in the spring and worked with the legislature and folks in the governor's office on this bill. My original proposal, which was to raise it to raise the fine to $2,000, did not include the provision about the hearing process. I think that there was concern among the legislators that was a significant increase in the fine, and they wanted their landlords to have some way to, challenge, I guess, the fines if they felt like it was the tenant's fault. So the language that's in the law is that any such owner assessed a civil penalty pursuant to this subparagraph shall have a right of appeal to the legislative body of the municipality or to the board of selectmen in a municipality where the legislative body is a town meeting. So that's what we're responding to. And I think in terms of the intent, it was to create an appeals process because the fine was increasing by a lot. Yeah.
So, the way that I read the bill, at the end of that provision, it says, upon grounds that such violation is proximately caused by a tenant's lawful or reckless act. So that, to me, just limits the
Yes.
legislative body acting as a hearing officer, so to speak, on that one defense.
Yes.
What other defenses would not be heard by the legislative body or hearing officer.
Yes.
So,
Well, I do have a question or two, but you can.
You have to give the floor, like you got the floor until.
Okay,
Chair says-
I'll ask my question. I think, Madam Chair, I was wondering maybe I thought it might be helpful to have LCI come join the presentation also since because I have a question about the enforcement of the act. I don't know, 3 year, if you think that would make sense.
Oh, more questions.
Good evening. Good, please state your name and address for the record.
Mark Stroud, 345 Max Street, Lake, Connecticut.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the idea behind increasing this fine and getting the state law passed to make that possible, and I'm very grateful to the administration for, I think that this law went into effect on Sunday, on October 1st. So I think we're going to be the first city in the state to take advantage of this increase, which is great. Having the fine be higher is obviously only one part of the equation. The other part is actually catching landlords who are, not taking care of the properties and leaving tenants in unsafe living conditions. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you're planning to make sure that we are implementing this fine for landlords who are not following the housing code and protecting their tenants.
Thank you. So we've actually started the process of sending out some notices for the residential licensing program. Recently, we sent them out October 2nd. The second notice is for the owners who have not responded to the first notice, and they have a process of 15 days. If they don't respond within the 15 days, we will be able to have the ability to assess the fine of $2,000 per dwelling. At that time, it would be, heard by the hearing officer as well, just to complete that fine and attach it to the deed.
Great.
And I might add also, this is the enforcing officer pursuant to the existing ordinance, and this doesn't change in the amendment, is the Office of Building Inspection and Enforcement. It can also be that, depending, I think, on the issue. And the fire marshal. So there are a number of enforcement departments involved in enforcing building code violations. LCI is primarily more responsible for light.
Thank you. If I could ask one more question. Sure. When I had some conversations with the city staff about this when I was working on legislation in the spring, and also I've talked with the state housing attorney or state attorney's office for housing matters, and it became clear that a lot of these fine cases have in the past gotten prosecuted brought to court by the state's attorney's office rather than by corp counsel, and it's a little bit complicated. There's civil penalties and then criminal penalties. The city can assess civil penalties, not criminal penalties. But because this fine is only civil penalty under the new state law, it has to be us. It has to be the city who brings an action to get this $2,000 fine. And we haven't really been doing that in the past very much. I think we've been sort of deferring to the state's attorney's office, and they've been bringing the cases, but they won't be able to get the $2,000 fine because it's only a civil fine. So point is, I guess, and the question is, are we planning to, and I think is the city prepared to take on that responsibility and that work to start taking these cases to court as a civil matter and trying to, get a $2,000 fine when landlords aren't taking care of their properties?
Well, I think historically, the reason that these have been sent to housing court is that housing court has more teeth, if you will. And there was more incentive to comply with the housing court than there was with the small amount of relatively small fines and, then turning into liens that we've already discussed. So this is certainly something we want to pursue because we want to get certainly increase the income of funds and fine money coming into the city. So it's something that we certainly are working to implement once this gets passed. And I don't believe that necessarily there would be a bar to housing court also prosecuting violations if there are different violations under the housing code or under the statutes than the violations that the city prosecutes. But that would be on a case-by-case basis.
Sounds good. Thank you. I definitely hope that the city's going to be aggressive about this and protecting tenants across the city with the new powers that we have under state law. Thank
Yes,
you.
I think we would have citations and then enforcement and a hearing officer. That would probably go through the hearing officer enforcement, and there is a mechanism to turn some of these fines that are unpaid into civil judgments at Superior Court. I think we have to pay $8 and there's a form we fill out, and it can be turned into a civil judgment, and then, that can be enforced like a civil judgment. So there are other options we have also.
Alder Bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let me make a statement, a clarifying statement, because it's a legislative body. So in discussion with leadership, the thought process was to have it set up similar in our telephone call to as tax abatement because it's just a fine. And so just as people come before the tax abatement committee and there are interest that's due for a very long time, the amount of time that it takes to get these people to come through and plead their case, it's not really that important. So it doesn't have to be done within a month. It's when the committee is able to hear them. So that was the thought process of having it come before the Board of Alders in a committee rather than perhaps sending it to a hearing officer, which would probably take the same amount of time if we look at how TTP hears their cases for tickets. It can be months before you get before that hearing.
The whole issue of hearing officers is something that has been getting a lot of attention recently, and the administration has been involved in trying to recruit individuals to be hearing officers to serve board. TTMP has traditionally been done by the Corporation Counsel's Office, attorneys in the Corporation Counsel's Office. But anti-blight enforcement, for example, and I think the building code enforcement, any of the other hearing officer requirements, we traditionally have just not had hearing officers appointed. And so we are in the process of trying to recruit people. They can't be city employees and we can't pay them. So now a number of these various situations where we can convert fines to liens involve a file review, where the hearing officer reviews to make sure that the appropriate notice has gone out, that there hasn't been a timely response, and doesn't involve an actual hearing where people come and testify. But that is something that we've been paying attention to in general. We are aware, and I think there was a moratorium for TTMP for the enforcement of parking citations during the pandemic. So that issue, which is not before us tonight, but those were not as probably as promptly as they have been in the past.
And I think it's interesting to note that it's written as up to $2,000. It's not a $2,000 fine. It's up to $2,000, or it shall not exceed $2,000. So it seems that it's left up to the discretion of LCI to decide the amount of what that fine should be per day, and then if they go back the second day, then it's considered, if it's not fixed within a reasonable amount of time, as LCI gives, what do you give, like a 7-day window, or how much time do you give before it's considered, again, a violation?
They could be up to 30 days.
30 days. So I'm not an attorney, I'm like the president, I pretend that I am sometimes. But the failure to comply, you wouldn't go out and say, well, you didn't fix this yesterday, so we're gonna fine you again the next day. That would certainly be unreasonable. And I don't interpret this, and when it says next day, as being a literal 24 hours necessarily, if you have given them a space of time to do the repair. So I guess what I'm asking is, you wouldn't go out and say, here's your $500 fine for this, and then leave it at that. You would give them an amount of time that they would have to repair it.
Yes, there's notice letters that have to go out, and I believe under the LCI anti-blight statutes, the notice letter goes out. There are 30 days there's a period of 30 days within which the party has to abate the problem or fix the problem. And then if that isn't done, a second letter goes out. And I believe they have 10 days after that to respond. And if there's no response, then it goes through the hearing officer review process, and a lien can then be perfected by the hearing officer.
So it's my understanding that after that process, then it goes day by day. So I'm thinking of Lake Street as an example, where they've been in blight for years. And they've mounted up to perhaps $140,000 in fines or liens against the property, because after you've exhausted everything that you can do, then it goes into that daily process of being fined daily. Is that how this is interpreted?
Under the anti-blight, that's correct.
Okay.
Fines can be up to $100 a day.
Right, and that's after you've exhausted all means of letters and communication with them if they're still not compliant. So then it goes into that daily process. So my thought process was after all that is done, then this is increased to $2,000 a day.
I read this to be just up to $2,000 a day upon the violation. I don't believe it's a situation where, it's $2,000 if it's not cured.
Yeah,
Is
that's a
that-
problem then.
Mhm.
That's a problem. The only other issue that I had, and I know he's waiting, but I still have the floor. The other issue that we would need to correct, I believe, is that this ordinance is not gender neutral. So we would need to go through it and correct all the he's and hims and stuff there. And the other thing that I saw that just had my attention is under the nuisance, and it uses the word, and I had it marked, and now I can't find it. But it marks the word serious nuisance. Let me go search. Madam Chair, for the sake of time, I will yield back, and then if I can come back when I find that line.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Alderman Slater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think,
That's okay.
and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the issue that you're pointing to, is an important one, but I think that the statutes are set up where there's a different process for blight versus for housing code violations, and the $100 a day fines are for blight and not for housing code violations necessarily. And I think what Attorney King mentioned, Corporation Counsel King mentioned at the beginning was that we're maybe not 100% sure about each day's failure to comply being a separate violation that's included in here, and whether that complies with the authorizing statute. And I think Corporation Counsel mentioned that they were going to be looking into that, because I think, as you mentioned, the idea is LCI, I think, gives maybe too much time to property owners they get noticed, they get a lot of time to address things, and then if it's not addressed, they get a fine. And I think we're trying to figure out, and that fine can now be up to $2,000. And then I think we're trying to figure out maybe whether we can have it be a $2,000 fine daily, but it's unclear if that's allowed under the statute.
That's
Does
correct.
that seem
Yes, I
correct?
think that's correct. Under this particular amendment, the enforcing officer is building inspection and enforcement. It could be the fire marshal, or it could be the health director. So there are other, it is a building code violation as opposed to an anti-blight, which, as I mentioned, there is now legislation that would allow us to increase the blight fines as well. So we'll probably see him here a couple months ago.
We look forward to it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and looking at the enforcement and the fees, I think that's a bit too drastic, the $2,000 maximum per day. And the reason why I think that's too drastic for New Haven, and I'm talking about New Haven, is because New Haven has a Livable Cities Initiative, and it has Fair Rent, our Fair Rent department. And they do enforcement. And we have, because of the homeless crisis that we have in the entire state of Connecticut, I think we have to work much more different. I do believe that they should be increased, the fines. But $2,000 a day in a city like ours, where we have old stock housing, we have landlords that have to do certain repairs. Thank you. I think that's a little to the extreme. Thank you.
Is there, do you have a question?
Yes, the question is, how did we come up in New Haven? And I understand the governor has set an amount of 2,000. How did we come up from night to day with an amount of 250 to an amount of $2,000?
Well, I think the intent of the administration was to take advantage of the ability to increase the fines up to $2,000, because we recognize there are some landlords, people who may only own one property or maybe live in a two-family house, and they may not be appropriate for a $2,000 fine necessarily unless there's a history of noncompliance or whatever. So there may be situations where a $2,000 fine might not be appropriate. But I think we're aware that there are certain landlords in the city who are, who have large numbers of rental properties and are not necessarily put to be compliant with code violations. So I think we want to have the ability to impose a significant fine on those landlords, but also have the discretion to impose a lower fine on a landlord who might, be more responsible or just not be in a financial position, to handle such a fine. Because we also don't want to fine landlords out of the housing business either, because it depletes the amount of available stock. So it just gives us the discretion, and frankly, I think we should, take advantage of it. If we don't use it, at least we have the ability to do it if we feel it's appropriate.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And up to a maximum, I think that would be much more realistic, that our Livable Cities Initiative Department and the appropriate individuals who will be working on this enforcement can have the capacity to make that decision.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. I would note that the language says a fine not to exceed $2,000. So it doesn't require the fine be exactly $2,000, but that's the ceiling, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I understand that we are talking about the fine specifically. And I'm wondering if through you, we may want to just look at some other portions of this before we have it to the floor. Just some things that I've noted that may need to be updated in this ordinance. Just for example, under this Article 1 says nuisance, a nuisance which is a serious threat to life, health, or safety. Shall we may want to look at some of those definitions just as an amendment. I'm not recommending that we do that in this meeting, but perhaps we can make further amendments on the floor, because this meeting is specifically talking about the penalty of the city of New Haven for the code of ordinances. And this might be just a scrivener's error in this, but in the whereas clause, it says, whereas the mayor of the city of New Haven board desires to amend.
Well, that must be, I would imagine it's a scrivener's error. And I would note that we're happy to work with the committee. If the committee wants to set up whatever meetings or other communication channels that might be appropriate, we're certainly happy to work on further amendments that the committee might want to make.
And my final question, Madam Chair, we do need prayer, right? Is I wonder to our court counsel if it would make sense to kind of run this along the same process as blight in its process. So I did hear what my colleague said, and I did understand that, but my thought process is wondering if it makes sense that the same process that blight would take in enforcement of fines, would it make sense to run that same process with this housing code violation when it comes to fines?
So, if I understand you correctly, you're proposing something like a notice, 30 days to cure, a second notice, and then if there's a shorter time to cure, and if there is no either payment of the fine or resolving the issue, then the $2,000 fine would be imposed or something like that. Is that?
I'm wondering if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't, but I'm just wondering if that makes sense for LCI's point of enforcement.
I think it's certainly the board's ordinance, so I think the board should have the ordinance at once. And we're happy to work with the board to get there. So we'll
So I want to do what makes sense, right? So you have to enforce this.
Yeah.
And so if you find holes in the enforcement process, then we certainly want to have that in consideration as we are deliberating over this ordinance.
Absolutely, definitely something to look into.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for being here this evening.
Okay.
And we'll open it up to public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So at this time, is Barbara Chow Yen here? Barbara Chow Yen?
You raise your-
Oh, please come forward. Good evening. If you would please state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
I'm Barbara Chalian. I live at 179 Cedar Hill. And I'm trying to find out with the whole $2,000 grant situation for landlords. Small landlords that have apartments for rent. And people destroying it, and then LCI coming in saying that it was reported that the landlord is the one who needs to fix stuff that tenants broke. How does that work?
So Madam Chair, we don't typically answer questions. We take the questions and then we will get it to the appropriate department, or when we deliberate, we'll certainly be able to have some answers, but this is just to hear testimony and take down their questions.
Yeah. And I guess I would ask, are you in support of the ordinance or in opposition to it?
I'm neither or, because I'm trying to find out how it works, because you have all these big landlords who get away with all these situations. And then you have the small landlords that have a small house, maybe 2 or 3 apartments, and tenants break it up. They call 211 or they call LCI, and then they come in and they are looking at the landlords to repair something that was done by the tenant, which is not fair, because I feel like the city inspects your property for the licensing. Section 8 does an inspection before the person moves in. Everything is fine. And then all of a sudden, things are broken, and now it becomes the landlord's responsibility. So that's my concern, to find out, how that works across the board, and every landlord get thrown into the same situation.
Do you mind just restating your question, just so that I make sure that I have it right? So the question of, how does this work if the tenant destroys property?
Yes.
That then the landlord is responsible for? And then does this apply to every landlord in the city?
Exactly. I'm trying to find out if that fine is fair to every landlord across the board, because you have big landlords and you have the small landlords, and you have tenants that come from some of those big landlords to the small landlords. The big landlords didn't help them out. They break the people place. Nobody wants to say, well, don't take this tenant because they're destructive. They get sent on to you. You do your best to do background checks and stuff. Nobody would say, well, no. And you take in that tenant, they come in, they destroy your place, and then they have somebody to back them. They have LCI to back them. They got 211 to tell them where to go. And we got a handbook here to say, well, this is landlord's rights. but at the end of the day, how much rights landlords have? And when I say landlords, small landlords, the ones who's trying to do everything in their power to keep up their place. But when you think you got all these bills to pay, plus repair stuff that you didn't break, you know. Again, my question is how fair it is for that amount to be straight across the board.
Thank you very much.
So that's my concern.
Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your questions, and we'll get those answers for you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
You as well.
Thank you.
At this time, is there anyone else who's here to testify on this item? Please come forward. Good evening. If you would please state your name and address for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
I'm Ruthin Canero. I live at 86 Foster Street.
Please do.
I've been a renter in New Haven since 2016, and $250 is a drop in the bucket compared to the tens of thousands of dollars I've paid to landlords over the years, let alone what the bigger companies like Ocean Management bring in. So to me, increasing the maximum penalty to $2,000 is a no-brainer and would give me some reassurance as a tenant that landlords will not leave me and other behaviors out to dry in cases of housing code violations. And I also want to add, it's encouraging to hear the committee talk about how they'll enforce these penalties in the past. Oh, no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. I think there was one. Oh yes, this is where. Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to testify.
My name is Sam Haller. I live at 65 Linden Street. I've been renting from a variety of landlords for the last decade or more. I'll say again, even small repairs done takes a lot of pulling teeth, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails. And for many of these larger landlords, $250 is no more than a pinprick, the ability to put pressure on larger landlords or landlords that are continually in non-compliance. I think a great boon. I'd like to add that landlords themselves do not produce public good for people. They do not provide housing for people. They are businesses, large or small, that take people's money to make a profit. That is what landlords do. I just wanted to say that the least we can ask in return for all this money, which mean other renters will never see again, is an apartment that is healthy and safe and in compliance with city ordinances. However we might manage that, I'm in favor, such as measures like this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony.
Of course.
So at this time, I will ask if there's any member of the public wishing to testify on this item. And for a second time, is there anyone present who wishes to testify on this item? And for a third and final time, if there are any members of the public present who would like to testify on this item. Seeing none, at this point, we're going to go to our third item. I'm going to ask the makers of the item please come forward. Good evening. Will you please state your name and address for the record? Please begin your presentation.
Marissa Bond, 54 Meadow Street, New Haven, Connecticut.
Raphael Ramos, 63 Downing Street, New Haven, Connecticut.
Please begin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us this weekend. I think I want the weekends to come. Tuesday. Thank you for having us this evening. Before you is the salon ordinance that we are proposing. It is a general state statute that went into effect October 1st, 2019. As you know, I started in 2020 right before COVID. And so in essence, what we are aiming to do is to really get the local ordinance in alignment with the state statute. And so before you are, it's some start are the slides that sort of outline the state section 19A-231 that outlines the requirement for local health to conduct annual inspections to ensure that we're also conducting inspections on these two parlors. So in your packets on the left-hand side, you will find the slides. And so we aim to be able to ensure that we are adopting and licensing and inspecting as we are required to inspect on an annual basis, and ensure that we are having a focus on operational standards and maintenance of the salons to minimize any health hazards, as well as investigate any complaints that may come in to the health department, as well as ensuring that we have a full scope of the individuals that are conducting business within this capacity, and as well enforce the state statutes if necessary. A salon includes any type of shop that is a barber, a hairdresser, and or a cosmetologist, nail technician, esthetician, eyelash technician, massage therapist, tattoo technician, and body piercers. So this is all within the category of the same state statute. Right now, when we conducted an assessment of the salons, we found there were about 192, of which 89 are under the hair salon category, 57 are barbershops, approximately 24 are nail salons, eyelash/estheticians, about 3 massage parlors, and 20 parlors of tattoos and piercings. And so what we aim to do is to align ourselves, and what we did is develop the ordinance in alignment with 23 other towns in our surrounding area to make sure that we are following the same standards and are consistent with the state statutes. And so we aim to start conducting annual inspections as being necessary, as well if complaints come in. Before you is also a sample inspection form, which is a standard inspection form that was developed by the Department of Public Health, which will be the same form that we would adopt. In regards to the financial impact, this is not going to be a significant revenue-driven department, that we are aiming to stay within nominal fees within the allowable fees that we are able to charge within the statute. And so our fee is going to be in alignment. So in total, we're estimating between the 192 establishments, about generating a revenue of $67,200, which is approximately $350, which is a $250 license fee and a $100 application fee. And so that is the goal for that in regards to the proposed fees. We will be looking to have an annual renewal January 1st. And so there will be an annual renewal for that process. We are looking to certainly ensure that the inspection consists of the sanitary condition, infection control focus, ensuring that customer protection is of the utmost priority. Also looking at licensing of individual entities. We are supposed to be ensuring that everyone that is covering a chair, for example, are having individual licenses and not a group licensing. And that process is regulated directly from the state. And nevertheless, we are supposed to be reporting that if we are to see that during our inspection. We also need to ensure that the facility is safe and that there's proper restrooms and wash basins, for example. And so we want to ensure that this process is obviously going to be new to our businesses. And so we do have a business engagement component that we want to make sure that the timeline allows for a transition. And so as we have done with many other initiatives, when we want to really serve at the role as an educator, we are aiming to conduct webinars both in English and Spanish with our Economic Development Small Business Resource Center. We have an Everbridge system which allow us to conduct tailored messaging to these businesses. We also will develop educational packets which will consist of the expectations and signage and layout that they are supposed to have. And so those will be hand delivered. We will update our information on our website so that it will be pre-recorded, for example, if someone was not able to attend the webinar. We will post it on all of our social media outlets so that we can be able to also inform different ways of communication on the different types of business owners. And so in summary, we are looking to implement this ordinance. It is of utmost importance to do so. We are well behind the regulatory requirements. We want to ensure that we are standardizing and ensuring the public health practices are being adhered to prevent infections and disease, as well as protecting employees and customers. We want to be able to guarantee that our salons are licensed and are upholding the statutory standards. And we also want to be able to have an accurate count of who actually has a business in our city. And so we hope that you will consider this ordinance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Are there questions for Alder Purple?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just ask a couple of questions. I'm just getting my, so the $250 fee is per salon. I think I'm just wondering the impact this is going to have on some of our smaller salons in our inner city that are not licensed throughout the city. And they're going under the corporate license of the head barber. And I think, because I was talking to a barber recently, and I think that what they're planning to do as a go around is to call their barbershop a school, where they're doing training for barbers, which would enable them not to require the license and still be able to cut hair. Is that accurate? Or is that something that?
So that is regulated by the state, and it's a significant, hefty process. I mean, there's only a very few schools throughout the entire state. So while I give kudos for that, I highly doubt that like the 30 barbershops are going to all become schools. It's a rigorous process that is regulated by the state. And so certainly we want to make sure that we're supporting the owners, and the license fee is not for every single chair, it's for the establishment as a whole. I get my hair done in New Haven, my son gets his hair cut in New Haven, and they're certainly charging very nominal fees. Like to get my hair to look like this, trust me, they're charging. My son pays a hefty amount to get his head cut. So, and it's not even, so I think that this is why we're presenting it now, because we also wanted to have businesses to transition from the COVID-19 pandemic and be able to get through that era, because I discovered in 2021, when we were reopening, that we had not been adhering to this ordinance. So this is not a new ordinance. As you know, I've been working on this ordinance for a while, but we also wanted to be realistic to the fact that our businesses did struggle. But the fact of the matter is that we are not in compliance with the state statute, and that's the reality. And so when we're thinking about the consumers, and I think each of you are consumers, I don't know who's getting haircuts and hair done on this committee, but we want to make sure that we're confident on the sanitation, because there's specific sanitations that have to be adhered, And so we need to be able to assess that as well. And so if individuals are not qualified, we want to be able to support on ways that they can get that license. We're not there to really condemn individuals' licensing. We're really there to ensure the safety of the entity. And so the inspection form is sort of on one of the slides so that you can see is that we're really there to look at the sanitary conditions and the requirements of having the separate wash stations and certain chemicals that need to be used in order to disinfect and things of that nature.
So you said that each barber has to be licensed though, not just the salon?
Correct, and that's already a state regulation, which is the state comes in already and just does random checks across the state. And so that's something, but if we see something, we have to say something.
So you won't be inspecting necessarily for licensed barbers?
We will be looking
In
for.
your one-time annual?
Yes, during the annual, but we're not gonna be randomly just going in. That's technically the state, which sort of ceased during the pandemic, but it has resumed it out.
And the barbers, are they required to have their license shown?
Correct, it should be displayed, just like food restaurants need to display their food permit, where it's prominent and visible for a consumer. Consumers should be able to visibly see their license.
And does this include, final question, does this include hair braiding also, or
Correct.
just, oh, those that braid hair also? They have to have a barber's license or what?
No,
kind of
it's just a
license?
salon
A
license.
salon license. And I don't know what S does this, the first, I don't know what that
That's
is.
facial treatment and things of that nature.
Oh, okay. That's all I have, Madam Chair, thank you.
Alder Morrison.
Yes. Thank you. So my first question is, where did the $250, where did that number come from?
So the state statute gives us a range of where we could charge, and then what we did is an assessment of all of the different 23 towns in the surrounding area to see the range of what they're charging, and so that's what we got the basis from.
So what is the minimum the state said?
The minimum the state said is $100.
Okay. So I'm just trying to understand, I get the safety piece, because that's important. You mix bad chemicals, it's all over. The place could catch on fire, the person could catch on fire. But I'm trying to understand this $250 choice, because I don't think that's good, because, yeah, we gonna talk about
Let's talk about it.
we all get our hair done, whatever the situation is, hairstylists, barbers, everybody's trying to eat and live, right? So I don't think $250 is appropriate. And one of the main reasons I don't think $250 is appropriate is because just like those licenses that you're talking about, those cost too. So if you're paying $250 for your license every year, and then you gotta pay another $250 every year, now you're talking $500. And our job is just to make sure people are safe. So I'm just trying to understand, why did we have to choose $250? Why couldn't we have chose $100? And so that's my first question.
Yes, I can answer it. So in essence, when I am making decisions on what we're going to be charging as a baseline, because we had to, when I revamped the lead program, I had to do the same exact thing. It's how are we going to be equitable in charging a fee that's going to be nominal. So the first step is looking at the hourly rate of the sanitarian that's going to go out and conduct that inspection, right? And so the hourly plus the fringe of that inspector has to be taken into account when the individual is applying and submitting the labor that it costs for an employee to be reviewing the application and processing the application. So it's really a tax basable back into the general fund. It's not something that's going to go back to my department. It's going back into the staff that's actually doing the work. So in essence, you all can make the decision on what fee structure you want, but when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the basis of the time that it takes the staff to be able to do all of this, the different processes.
Okay, so I guess I look at it, they gotta do that job regardless. The city is gonna pay them regardless. I'm looking at, these are our residents we're talking about, right? We're talking about our residents who are trying to be entrepreneurs. And when you have these kind of fees popping up here for this, another fee popping in over here for that, that really kind of makes a person think, maybe I don't want to be an entrepreneur in the city of New Haven. Here, you know, styling, that trade goes back to the motherland. That goes so far back. So for the city to want to, you know, make money, because that's what it sounds like. Because initially I thought this was about maintaining safety, but it sounds like it's about maintaining safety and money. But that shouldn't be the point. I mean, yeah, you do your inspections, you should do your inspection. $100, okay, but $250 is a lot, especially when around the same time you have to pay for your license. And you're right.
In January?
We have, yeah, in January, because I got a lot of different licenses and I got a lot of fees I have to pay. So everybody pays around January. But like you said, we make that decision.
Correct.
I just wanted to know from you, because it may be that $250 was this magic number about something, but it doesn't sound like it. I understand you saying that, you know, you took into consideration how much it costs to have a person go out and all those things, but they gotta do that anyway, because that's their job. And so I
I'm
get
not hearing no
that.
question. I respect your comment.
Yeah, no, you answered my question. I said, where did the $250 come from? You made a decision, but the state says.
I made a recommendation. I'm not making a decision.
Right. But you put it before us.
Correct.
And so now I'm asking you the question. So you made that choice. You put it before us.
Correct.
You told us that the state starts at $100.
The state recommends 250. They increased it in 2019.
But
so the recommendation came from the state.
But the base is $100. That's what you just said. Unless that's not.
The base used to be $100.
Okay, and
then the state said.
Direct the bond.
But I'm still answering.
No, you answered. I don't need any more answer. You answered the question. There's $100, right? That's all I'm just trying to get clear. It's $100, right? Or more. And so I wanted to know where that came from. And then I also wanted to know, when are these inspections done? One. Another thing, when is the person or company or whomever expected to pay this recommended $250? And I do see that this application fee is $100. And I'm assuming this is a one-time $100?
It's the annual application fee. So through the chair, because I need to make sure that I offer clarification, because I want to make sure this is a public meeting. And so through the Public Health Act 19-117, which is in your slides, the $250 is referenced as a recommendation. It used to be $100. And so we can start at a baseline of $100, but the recommendation from the Department of Public Health went up to $250 October 1st in 2019. The issue here is that we did not have this ordinance in place prior to 2019. So I don't have a baseline. I was working off the baseline with the recommendations from the state and then also making an assessment internally. So I just want to make sure that I clarified on that. And then your question regarding inspections, as I noted, they're done annually. And so they will be conducted annually, and we will be doing them around January.
So around January, these will be done. So just so I have this right. So around January, a person would be, or a company would be expected to come up with $250 for, just because they have a business. Another $100 for this application fee, and then another $200 to $250 for their insurance. So the 1st of January, basically.
Just $250, just one time $100, the first time.
Right.
And then the $250 there annually.
Right, well, that's what I had asked, was the $100 every year?
No.
Okay, so it's the $250 annual, right? Every January, basically, plus the company, the licensee, has to pay another $250 annually to the state to maintain your license. So we're saying, we're putting our residents, our business owners in a position to have to, before they can even open the door after New Year's Day, they gotta basically put out $500 in order to function.
Yeah, and I hear your point, and so if we want to look at the timeline and change the license fee to a different month to allow reprieve of the fees, we can certainly do that. So as we're looking at the ordinance and we know that, okay, $250 is due in January for their license, and maybe you can change it to May. So we typically charge food establishments around May 1st, and so that we could just align the salon's license fee at the same time. So that can be a consideration.
Right, that's a good consideration, but you know, I'm not in agreement with the $250, but the time frame definitely needs to look at that, because we have to take totally into consideration all the other expenses that people have as related to their business. And so, okay. So my question is answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Stephen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my colleagues make good points, and I was wondering about the inspections. I mean, there are a lot of, the health department's obviously already very busy. We got a lot of salons, barbershops across the city. Are you expecting that it's going to be an issue at all to inspect every single one across the city? And what happens to a business if the city doesn't have the capacity to inspect them, they haven't gotten their inspection until March? Like, are they still able to operate using the license from the year before? Is there?
That's a really good question, and the unfortunate part is that we have a mandate to do, and so that's the unfortunate part. So I cannot get around it. Do I have enough sanitarians? No. I put before this past budget cycle 4 sanitarians and was denied the positions. Therefore, I have to still deal with the fact, as the health director, I have a duty as an agent of the state to make sure that the city of New Haven is aligned with the state mandates. And so if I ignore the state mandate, I just can't ignore it anymore, right? So I discovered it, I have to address it and make sure that we're in compliance. And so that's something that we're working through. And we try our best to making sure that it might be not at the accurate, like it's gonna be every January, we might be a little bit off, but certainly we'll make sure that it's once a year. It's just that, unfortunately, we are dealing with a number of competing factors that the sanitarians have to maneuver. And, you know, the infrastructure is certainly something that I raised previously.
Thank you. So if a business doesn't get an inspection for a few months after January 1st because the city isn't able to send the sanitarian out, are they still able to operate? Are they?
Absolutely. So the way we do it is that they have all of this stuff will be digitalized online. So they apply, they file their fee online, just like our food establishment, our restaurant businesses do. And so, and then we will conduct inspections, but typically we try to stagger them so that, you know, we're getting to these different establishments within the mandated time.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions?
I have one question. Okay. You had indicated initially that the city of New Haven has not been doing this type of enforcement. Is that correct?
We have not.
Okay, yes, so as you're also indicating that in your plan, you're indicating about engagement with the businesses. And that before establishing some form of enforcement, that you're going to be making them aware of what's established. Why not consider establishing some sort of education program with a mass of individuals who have these businesses prior to doing this kind of enforcement, prior to establishing an amount of $250 to address prevention of disease and illness within businesses? Thank you.
Yeah, so that is the purpose of business engagement, is education. That is the full purpose of it.
So, thank you so much for your presentation. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'll ask, are there any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? Are there any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? And for a third time, is there anyone from public wishing to testify on this item? Seeing none, motion is approved. Alderman Fairwell.
I'm trying to move that we close the public portion of this meeting.
Second.
Item has been moved and second discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have closed the public portion. Alderman Fairwell.
Madam Chair, I move item 1.
Second.
The item has been moved and second discussion. Who would like to begin? I think, so to begin, so we're talking about the Code of Ordinances, section 12.5.43.2. Alderman Fairwell.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we're off to a good start with this, but I don't think we're there yet. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered around the $2,000 amount.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
The elevator.
Yes,
My apologies.
that's okay, it's been a long night.
This is all set and ready to go.
Okay.
Sealed, tax sealed, and I think that we are ready to go with this. There have been, I think we worked on this for about 2 years in a committee, back and forth with the Disability Committee, our Office of Disability, Corp Council, LCI, the Building Department, back and forth to see what makes sense. And I think that the final amendment to this is suitable for our city. We learned a lot about the operation of elevators. We had all kinds of stats from the fire department on how many times elevators go out during the course of, we had it going back to 5 years, how many times they went out, what it costs for firemen to go and to have to carry people up and down the stairs. And so, and landlords or property owners or property or management companies that would not address elevators being out for weeks at a time. Sometimes it was because of parts not being available, and I know that was a problem during the COVID season. But even with that going on, they still have a responsibility to make sure that their tenants were being accommodated. And so with all the accommodations that are in this ordinance, with having to, after the 48 hours, elevators or people being transported to a facility that they would be accommodated, I think I recommend that we pass or give a favorable recommendation to the full board of voters, because I think this is a good piece of legislation. Excuse me for that with me.
Thank you, Alderman.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that all the furlough is moving to the latest version, right? This is what we're talking about. The version that, the latest is what's being moved.
Yes.
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 Okay.
I heard the yeses, but I needed to say yes for myself. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Marchand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank my colleagues from the 18th and 27th Ward for their work on this. I remember some years ago now, some pretty egregious incidents. One I know that happened in Ward 24, that included, that involved large apartment buildings with people with disabilities living on the upper floors who were literally trapped and unable to leave their domicile to go about their lives. And it was intolerable and unacceptable that that situation happened. And so this ordinance, which has been a while in the making, is a very welcome update to our code of ordinances and gives residents more clarity about where they should go, whom they should call, what they can do under circumstances where they're not able to get off the floor where they live. I do think the city will have to be ready to take action in cases where there are non-responsive property owners. And so LCI or other agencies of the city will have to be ready to provide direct assistance to staff. So, because, you know, obviously the prime concern here is the safety of residents, and we can't wait for a property owner to return a phone call or respond after several days of trying to reach them. So the city's gonna have to be ready to take action, relocate people, and then give the bill to the property owner. Hopefully, we won't see that very often. Hopefully, we'll have cooperative property owners who understand their obligations. But I think this helps to clarify what those obligations are and gives the city stronger pathways, clearer pathways for how this can be enforced. And so I recommend that we vote yes on the motion for a favorable recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go. Well, any other comments from the committee? I would like to make sure that we vote with over for the window and set away for just a moment.
Madam Chair, you could decide to have a brief recess until we say he's able to return. I don't know that we would want to move on any other item without him here either.
Certainly. So, well, with that being said, we will take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hello. How are you? Good.
Hey, Mark.
On side here. That's right. So. Just let us know that. Well, I think we overlooked them. I bet she is. That's what she married.
Sorry, I missed the first half of this one. Yeah, I was wondering if, I'm sorry, but if you could explain again the talk, like, the mechanism for the fines versus the allowance for it.
You can. Yeah, I mean, my understanding of the way it works is basically if there are city corporation council office can levy civil penalties through liens or I think they're called court judgments on landlords if they violate city ordinances that we have fines for. The state's attorney's office can also, there's a statute that says that the city can like pass on our statute, our enforcement actions to the state attorney's office for housing code matters. It's like a specific thing for housing court. Housing code issues, the state's attorney's office for housing can prosecute landlords and get fines.
Is that mechanism still going to be in place?
Yeah, but the issue, and my understanding of what happened was, so I mean, it was probably based on a lot of independent stories last year and over the last few years of talking to tenants in the city, but I work in County Courts of Children, I proposed this to the legislature and the governor's office in the spring, and I had proposed increasing it to $2,000, and I talked to the state attorney's office, and they said they wanted it to be both civil and criminal. The legislation that passed in the spring was only civil penalties. So that means that now, I think, my understanding of how it's more is the city can get a $2,000 fine if it's up to a $2,000 fine if it goes through the civil fine process that Corporation Council needs to lead. the state's attorney will still be allowed to get $250 fines, but I don't think that they will be able to get $2,000 fines in criminal and housing court prosecution, because the statute that passed says specifically civil penalties can be up to $2,000.
Can they both setting up the same issue or?
Well, it was clearing up, but it was still raining. It was raining at 3 o'clock, it's not raining hard. But you're setting up.
Is that like? Question, but is that like just like identify person?
Yeah, a little bit of.
Yeah, I think, I mean, corporate counsel is they're a better person to ask about how they're planning to have that work. But, you know, the staff, I think the idea is that there would be a hearing officer, and then they would sort of report, I think, to the board. And we would make
For every case or just?
if it gets appealed,
Oh.
the idea that it was a willful or willful act that potentially caused the damage.
So otherwise,
Yeah, it doesn't have to go to the board unless it gets appealed. If it gets, the statute that passed has an appeal process that goes to the board. So that we're stopping before with the hearing officer.
And in terms of the like up to 2000, are there going to be standards for like, you know, how many violations get used?
That's a question for LCI. I don't know what they how they want to do that. I think the important thing is just I think LCI is not set up to try to punish people unnecessarily. I think that's what they do. But this is about holding landlords accountable when they're not taking care of their property, when people are conditions that are safe and not healthy for their families. And so when we have the option to go up to $2,000, and also like it's usually after a lot of time has passed, that when you get to these fines, it's almost always because landlords have
They would get it every now and then. Some years they got
weeks and weeks, maybe months before they've complied with what they've been told to do by the city. So it's like a last resort, really, and it's for the big landlords in particular who, I think the city wants to work with small landlords. We're not trying to run anybody out of business, but big landlords who have been going to housing court for dozens of violations every, couple months sometimes, and that the fines have not been, clearly not been deterring them from continuing to do that. So trying to strengthen the penalty, and hopefully they will, if we hit them in the wall, then hopefully we'll start.
And I know there's question of like per day, but
yeah, I think
per violation too.
It is $2,000 if you find multiple violations on the same day. Yeah.
But if you do like a follow-up inspection.
And you find new violations, that could be another $2,000. Yes, well, that's the thing that LCA, that city, I think, yeah, I think probably work on the legislation. I mean, we'll see what happens. But I think the legislation is not going to be, it's not final after it comes out of committee. I think there's maybe there could be an amendment on the floor about the per day issue, because I think corporate counsel is review the state statute and make sure that we're in compliance with what the state statute says.
And I think one of the bottom surgery of what happens in that seems like a possible avenue for restoration and political favoritism and stuff like that. So that's something that
Yeah, I mean, I think we should talk to LCI about the schedules if they want to make some sort of objective criteria for setting this. But that's a fair point.
I imagine you're going to talk about this
Yeah.
before, but is there anything you want to say just in general? Because like, I imagine it's been a long process next year.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the I'm a legislative coordinator at Connecticut Voice for Children. This was one of my top priority bills that I was advocating for last session. I basically, I talked to some legislators. It was actually, we had been trying to figure out what the right number was, and this hadn't changed. This maximum fine hadn't changed since 2003, so this is the first time in 20 years it's been increased, and we really felt like the the neglect and pattern of neglect that we've seen from a lot of landlords around the state. This is not those, that's why we were working on this statewide legislation, would give our municipalities a chance to hold landlords accountable, protect tenants. And, this is not about raising revenue for the city, it's about protecting our families in New Haven. There's so many people who are living in conditions that are not safe and not healthy, and I think this should give the city just another tool to make sure landlords are keeping people safe. And also, I think hopefully there won't have to be that many fines because landlords, see that this is what they will face, and they'll take better care of the properties. And also, I think it maybe gives tenants a little bit more confidence that if they tell their landlord there's an issue that needs to get fixed, they call the LCI, the landlord's just going to move more quickly because they're trying to avoid the fine. Right now, the $250 fine, I think we've seen there've been a whole bunch of landlords that go to housing court for 20 violations at $250 each, and they pay it and they go home and they're like, they don't care particularly. It doesn't seem so. That's the idea. And definitely Representative Lamar was very helpful, and he introduced one of the bills that ended up in the housing omnibus bill that Majority Leader Jason Rojas pushed, and the governor's office also was very helpful. Johnny Dock, with the governor's chief of staff, helped work on this. So I'm grateful for their help. And a lot of advocates that get around the state.
You can do it. I know. You start thinking about what.
I know the quarter of some of our colleagues.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back.
Hey,
On Friday.
that's right.
I'm tired. I'm tired, of course, I'm tired. I know, I got you involved in something.
All right.
We work from sitting on the couch.
Thank you so much for your patience. So we are back in session. And we were at the point, so we were discussing the first item before us, the ordinance amendment, going over, it says 12.5.4312. Are there any further comments from committee and discussion? So we'll proceed to the vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? Any abstentions? That item passed. Alder Frillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move item 2.
Second.
The item has been moved and second. Discussion. Alder Frillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item, I don't believe is quite ready yet. There are a series of questions that still need to be answered with the fines, with the legislative process. We do know that it's up to, but the Corp Council has said that they're going to do a little bit more research on how those fines are going to be imposed. We still have the question of whether it's going to be through our legislative body directly through a committee process, or whether we're going to give to a hearing officer. And so I think it's reasonable for us to hold on to this for a little bit longer. And work out some of the kinks. I don't think that we'll be able to work that out in the next 2 weeks before our next Board of Alders meeting. I do recognize that we have a lot in the hopper still. We have the CRB and other items that are going to take a time to get through. It is just my suggestion, but if colleagues feel that we can get this done and maybe hold it on the floor. Maybe that's a good recommendation also, but it's certainly not ready, I feel, for a favorable recommendation at this time.
Madam Chair,
Alder Rodriguez.
in review of the written correspondence that was provided to us, many are tenants and they are sharing their concern regarding landlords, and they do mention about property violations and disrepair and absentee landlords, and that they feel that this is an amount that's reasonable to property violation to 2,000. Many of the writers are indicating that they're talking about it being like a maximum. So I don't think they're really clear on exactly what the infraction or the enforcement amount is going to be. Personally, I believe that we need to look at that amount. So I feel that at this time, it is not the best thing. I think there needs to be a plan. And I think that our Livable Cities Initiative should have a more important role in bringing to us exactly how this enforcement is going to happen, taking into account also that, again, the homeless crisis that we have, and again, building relationships between landlords and tenants, and understanding that we are improving our departments so that we could specifically avoid more homelessness. And so I think we need to take into account also the fact of multifamily houses, absentee landlords, versus as this landlord that came before us, indicating also tenants that are not taking care of their apartments, and they're having to address the disrepairs that need to be done. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is what I have to share.
Thank you, Alder Rodriguez. And Alder Rashad, and then Alder Sedan.
Madam Chair, may I go for a point of clarification? I should have said that I am in favor of this ordinance amendment. And so I think it's important to say that, because I think my colleague on the end is not in favor of it. It sounded like, and so.
Madam Chair, if I may, thank you. If I may, I think this needs more work. This ordinance needs more work. I'm not saying that I'm not in favor of it, but the way that it is right now, I think it's only fair that we visit this and do some more work, everyone together, to come up with something that we can all win-win on. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Rashad.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to speak in favor of taking advantage of the opportunity that the change in state law provided to raise the maximum allowed fines for these kinds of violations. I think at a time when we have so many residents living in squalid conditions, paying rent to unaccountable landlords, that we need every tool in our tool belt to be able to compel uncooperative landlords, which is not most landlords, but there's enough of them. We need to have the tools in our tool belt to compel their compliance with the codes in place to protect the life and welfare of our renters. And that is crucial, vital, and we're in a crisis. So I'm in favor of it. Having said that, I wish we had gotten more information tonight about how the department planned to implement this. It became clear in the course of our discussion with city staff that raising the maximum fine amount up to $2,000 was not going to mean that every single fine would be $2,000. And it also became less clear about how much time a property owner would be given to remedy the defaults before subsequent and additional fines were applied. And that matters. Like, the ordinance doesn't necessarily have to spell out all of those details, because it sets the limits for what the city can do. But as legislators, we need to understand what the department's plans are for how they're going to implement that, because that addresses some of the concerns perhaps we might have about, treating one large landowner with multiple properties in their portfolio perhaps differently from the owner of a very small building, and that's the only property they have, and it's a bigger hardship for that competent to make rapid repairs. So, and I suspect that the folks at LCI have some appreciation of those factors and would develop a policy to guide their staff in the field for how to apply the fines. I don't think it would be just, well, it's your discretion, frontline worker. There would be some kind of policy, I suppose. But what is that policy? What is the policy now? Those kinds of operational details, it would be useful to have when we're looking at changing ordinances that affect agencies and how they operate. And that context was fairly scarce tonight. I would feel more confident understanding if we had more information. I believe we have an offer from our Corporation Council to do some follow-up work in connection with this body. So I would be in favor of keeping the item in committee, even though I feel some significant urgency to take action in the area, given the crisis that we have in our community. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Shaw. Alderman Statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my colleagues. I think I definitely feel a lot of urgency. I know we all feel a lot of urgency about this issue. We've all heard from tenants, probably in our neighborhoods, who are dealing with, landlords who are not taking care of their properties and not making sure that folks are living in safe and healthy conditions. And this is a really important issue, especially just how old our housing stock is in New Haven, and with rents going up and there not being that many options. A lot of tenants are just stuck with the landlord who may not be taking care of their the property and meeting their responsibility. I think something that somebody who would testify tonight mentioned is this is an obligation. It's a responsibility. If you're paying rent, you deserve what you're paying for, which is a safe, healthy place to live that meets all the codes, including the housing code. So I'm definitely strongly in support of taking advantage of the new law that's passed at the state level to increase the fine. I think there are definitely a couple of things we need to work out, especially related to whether this can be applied every day. And I think my colleagues raised good points as well about the time that landlords have to respond. My understanding is generally, at least the way things work now, whenever we get to a fine, that's usually it's already, the landlords have already known about this for a long time, but I think it would be helpful to have LCI come back and have a little bit of a better explanation about exactly how they're planning to implement this. And also, I think the discretion may be about the amount that's going to get handed down in certain situations. It would be helpful to have some idea if they have ideas about how they're planning to make those decisions. So I'm in support of the concept, definitely, and grateful to the administration for making this. I think hopefully we'll still maybe be the first in the state. Obviously, that's not what matters, but we are, I think, are moving quickly to try to protect tenants and take advantage of this opportunity to hold landlords in our community accountable. And I look forward to continuing to work on it with colleagues and the administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Statement. Any other?
Madam Chair, if I may, a writer indicated, Melissa Singleton, Edgewood Avenue in New Haven, her last line reads, finding them is just the beginning. What do we do to confirm they have the knowledge needed to not do it again? A class training or educating them should be considered to confirm they have a better understanding of their duties as a landlord. See, this is a good thing that our residents are sharing this, because again, the roles that Livable City Initiatives and our Fair Rent Department take in this ordinance, in the enforcement of this ordinance, is going to be significant. So again, I just want to reiterate, to have Livable Cities Initiative define its plan would be significant in the approval of this of the improvement of this ordinance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, colleague. Just a point of clarification that the Fair Rent Commission is not a part of this process. It is just
Thank you.
LCI.
Thank you, yes.
Any further discussion? Alderman Shaw?
Madam Chair, if it is the will of the committee not to move forward with this, then we either should have the motion rescinded or we should have a motion to table, because the item has been moved, which was necessary in order for us to have discussion.
Indeed.
So perhaps the maker of the motion decide what to do.
Alder Fritlow.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleague from the 25th Ward. I move that we table this item.
Second.
It is moved in second. Discussion.
Madam Chair, point of order, there's no discussion on the motion to table.
Thank you so much. That is correct. All those in favor of tabling the item, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We get tabled item number 2, and then on to our last item of the evening, item number 3. Ordinance amendment of the New Haven Code of Ordinances to license and inspect salons within the city of New Haven. Alder Morrison.
I move this item. Do I need to?
Second.
Okay.
The item is moved to second. Discussion. Alder Morrison.
So I first want to say, I think this is a good, it's a law, right? This law comes from the state of Connecticut, and our job is to ensure the safety of our residents within our municipalities. And I'm glad that the Director of Public Health has brought this law to our attention for all the safety reasons outlined. However, I am not pleased with the annual fee of $250 yearly for our entrepreneurs here in the city of New Haven. As testified, the state did start off with $100. Now, it's not the fault of the residents, the business owners, the public health, it's no one's fault, but it started at $100. And so for our town to have to start off with $250, I don't think that's fair. Because just because you're a business owner does not mean you have a whole lot of money. I was mentioning earlier, when you hold a license to do a service such as this, you have many fees that you have to pay annually around the same time. And as testified, the time frame was looked at January, even though we can look to push it down. But I think that that we should look to cut this back to $150 annually, and then when it seemed fit, come back to look at the possibility of changing the fee. But I don't think that we should right off the bat start off with $250, because most licensing, if you're a hairstylist, your license costs you $250. So a person will have to, before they do one head in the new year, put out $500. That's a lot of money, when you're a business owner and you're trying to make it. So yeah. So 2 things, I think we should bring that amount down to $150, and we should also push the fee date to maybe May. I'm thinking October, but I don't know if that's just going to be too crazy, because I'm thinking about taxes are due in July, right? So that's it. January taxes are due. So you got all these fees that people constantly have to put out. They're putting out so much that they can't even bring any money in. And so those are my 2 points. I agree that this law, that we need to have this established law in the city of New Haven. I agree with the fact that there should be an annual fee, but that annual fee is too high, and we need to push the date out. So that's where I'm at. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. I have Alder Fritlow with you.
Are you making a motion, or are you?
No, we was having discussion.
So you're just talking, you're not actually making a motion to reduce it.
I'm going to make that after everybody has
Okay.
their discussion.
Got you. Okay, great, thank you. Madam Chair?
Just giving the reasons.
Okay, yep. So thank you, Madam Chair. I do agree with my colleague from the 22nd Ward. I do agree that we should consider making it payable in the month of May, as it would align with the food license, which seems to be something that the health department will be able to coordinate, since it was sort of the recommendation. I think that it would be good if we were to divide the fee. I have in mind something a little heftier, but I was thinking, because I know how much it costs to get a haircut. It's $50 a pop, right? It's $50 for a haircut. So,
I don't know where you go, but go ahead.
I go to my brother's, and it's $50 to get a haircut. So with a tip included, right? So I'm thinking, and we know how it works. Every barber has their chair, and they have to pay for that chair. And so the salon itself probably is not going to pay $500. The owner, he's going to collect that money from the stylist and divvy it up among them. If they smart business, that's what I would do. So I would recommend that we would do 4 and under. 4 stylists and under would be $175, and then 5 and above would be $250, payable in the month of May. That would be something that I would like for us to discuss. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Rahat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm grateful for the thought that our Director of Public Health has put into this matter. Protecting the health and welfare of the clients of these establishments is important. Anytime you're cutting hair with scissors, with clippers, you can cut something. And if that implement is contaminated, you could do real harm to somebody, including communicating bloodborne diseases. And so let's not forget that we're talking a lot about hairstylists, because that's something I think all of us use, although I'm overdue myself. We're also talking about tattoo parlors, body piercing establishments, other businesses that become physically intimate with clients in certain ways that could unintentionally spread disease or cause infection. And so it's actually very important for these establishments to be inspected and to be certified as having all the components in place to safely operate and make sure that people are protected from inadvertent harm. And so, there's a state law around for good reason. I think we should definitely get ourselves into compliance and alignment with the state law. And that makes sense to me. I appreciated the public health director's back of the envelope, maybe it was more rigorous than that, calculation of what the cost of inspecting these establishments would be, and could maybe the fees collected pay for the staff time used to inspect these establishments. I mean, that's it's a department head rationale, right? They're always looking to see how to pay for the activity that they are engaged in. If we don't have to agree with that. If we don't, then it becomes, it's not like a self-funding regulatory activity, which just means that the taxpayers pay for whatever staff time is spent on the endeavor that's not covered by the actual fees, right? And we could decide to do that. We could say, look, we were asking the rest of our taxpayers to foot the bill for these staff hours because they're clients of these establishments as well, and they want those establishments to be financially successful. So, I'm open to considering a different amount. I'm a little cautious about complicating the structure of it without knowing for sure that we can actually do that. Right now we're talking about creating an inspection regimen in response to state law. What does the state law say about what discretion the city has for the public health director mentioned a minimum and a maximum, but you know, it may be that the state law is silent on different kinds of fee structures that depend on the size of the establishment, but the state law might actually say something about that. So before we would come up with before we would advance on a proposal like that, I want to make sure we kick the tires on and make sure that there's legal for us to do. The simpler thing would be to say, well, 250 is too much, let's bring it to 200 or 150 or whatever. It seems like based on what we heard from our expert staff person, it sounds like we have discretion between $100 and $250. So I think we could exercise that discretion. But if we want to contemplate some other arrangement, then I would recommend we just do a little more homework on it and make sure that we're allowed to do that before we would move on, something like that. So overall, so that there's no confusion, I'm in favor of this ordinance amendment, although I'm open to changing the $250 amount for the annual license. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Alderman Morrison.
I want to make a motion. I wanted to make a motion, but I don't know if we're there. I don't know.
Were there any other discussion? Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The New Haven Public Health Department is now looking to establish this ordinance in New Haven. And again, for good cause. We just went through the pandemic, right? The COVID pandemic. And I know for a fact that in my ward, in some of the businesses of this nature, they took certain cares to address the pandemic. The reason why I bring this is because this ordinance is going to address infectious diseases and it's going to protect, I think it would establish a partnership, a relationship between these businesses and our health department, again, serving as a form of reference that New Haven is being careful with its businesses, especially in a city like New Haven, where we're also focusing on small businesses in the city to improve them, to increase the number of businesses and so forth. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Rodriguez. Any further discussion? Alder Morrison.
I would like to make a motion. I don't know if it can be double. I would like to make a motion to change this annual fee to $150. Sorry, $150, and to also change the date to May 1st, as this would be a better way to induct all of our shops and salons that we're talking about into this process. Do I say more to it?
So that's a motion to amend?
That's a motion to amend. Yeah. So I'm done.
Second.
Okay.
The item is moved in second. Discussion on the item as amended.
No, on the amendment.
On the amendment. Thank you.
On the amendment. So again, my reasoning for wanting to bring it as close to what they started off with as far as the cost is because we didn't start off with them, right? And I don't think it's fair to bring our entrepreneurs into a situation at a higher level. I think they should have the opportunity to start off at a lower level. And then as time goes on, if this body feels that we need to increase these fees, then we can look to increase these fees. So that's my reason for the 150. But then as far as the time frame, May seems like, it's around income tax time, it's around, times where people have a couple of extra dollars versus January. You just went through the holidays, you're paying your taxes, and you're paying for your fees to hold the license to do whatever the service is. And so that's why I think that this is important.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Alder Morrison, and then Alder Savick, and then Alder Phil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to ask a question through you. Did we get confirmation that in fact the licenses, the state licenses for these professionals are due January? I know that our colleague said there's a lot of licenses due January 1st, but did we get confirmation that in fact these particular licenses for these establishments the state licenses come due in January. The reason why I'm asking is because without knowing that for certain, if we move it to May, what if those due dates are May, right? I simply don't know for myself, and I'm trying to remember if our director of public health actually confirmed that. I see that Mr. Lucas is shaking his head, but you know, that would be useful to confirm that, just to make sure that we're not moving it to another date and it's not actually having the intended effect. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, we are able to get that opinion from staff.
Yeah.
I'm Chair.
Can the staff, what is the opinion of the staff? And have we received confirmation that the license fee comes due in
We
January?
believe so, but we will confirm that before your second reading. Should you need to make any adjustments at that time, that will be an opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Alderman Morrison.
No, I just wanted to say, I hold a license and I know every first I have to pay. And other licenses that I know, there's millions of licenses you're due. But then you do have some licenses that are due on your birthday.
Alderman
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the license I think our colleague has is probably in a different field, or is it also in this field?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Right.
Okay. So I think, you know, we can obviously make an adjustment for the second reading if our staff can confirm when the license for these particular establishments from the state are due. Because I think the intention is to not have both of those fees hit at the same time for those small businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Shaw. I had Alder Statement and then Alder Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm in support of the amendment. I think that, you know, we have a lot of small business owners around the city who are just might be just starting out, might not have a big salon or barbershop, tattoo parlor, whatever it is, and a lower fee might just make it a little easier for them to decide they want to open and be able to, you know, continue paying their bills, staff, whatever it is. I also think that one thing that comes up with fees and stuff like this, especially for inspections, where we're hoping, where the real goal of this is not about the revenue, but it's about the health benefits, is when you have lower fees, sometimes that makes people more likely to comply and be more out in the open. And sometimes if you have a higher fee, then maybe people are gonna try to avoid the inspection process, and then we wouldn't get the health benefits. So I think $150 seems reasonable, and I hope that you know, as we implement this, it'll benefit us with a safer city. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Farrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know what to say. But I will say that I am in favor. I was just thinking that I would like to see the fee schedule a little bit higher, but in risk of being cut by my barber,
Literally.
I will comply with the $150 fee, but I think it's also good what my colleague to my right said, that this is really not just about the fee schedule, but about making sure that all of our salons and barbers and the various places that have these type of services are clean and safe. We have all seen men that have the bumps on the back of their neck that have come from dirty razors. And so we want to congratulate our health director for taking this initiative and following this state law. And so once again, I'm in favor of this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Farrell. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, we are voting on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Abstaining? The amendment has passed. We are back to the item as amended. Alder Burnham.
Madam Chair, I recommend that we vote yes on favorable recommendation to the full board of this item as amended. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, any further?
So already moved, Mr. Majority?
Yeah.
Are you just saying ditto?
Oh, my apologies.
It's already moved.
Right.
That was just his discussion to support it.
Thank you.
Any
Amen.
further discussion?
And, Alderman Morrison, same question that I had for Alderman Furlow with the first one. I just want to make sure you're moving the last version as amended.
$150 in May? Yes.
Right, on the one that they presented today. On the version that they presented today.
Yeah, but she showed us that.
Okay.
Okay. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? The item is passed. At this time, motion to adjourn is appropriate.
So moved.
Second.
I just moved to second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That is the committee. There's no no's. Thank you so much. Have a good day. You're adjourned.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm gonna speak to